Hello. Welcome to part two of the series we're doing on how to navigate a crisis season. So last week in part one, we talked about kind of what a crisis is and the very first step to take, which is deciding if you're going to be a victim or a person who takes responsibility. And this doesn't mean that the crisis is your fault. You're not blaming yourself, but it does mean that you step into ownership of what you can control and your attitude, which is your attitude. So we talked about that last week, had a whole video on that. And we also basically ended kind of with the question of, are you going to let the crisis make you bitter or better? It's your choice. Okay. Once you've made that decision, if you have decided that you're going to step out of victim, the idea that it's all happening to you, and you've made the choice that you're going to step into ownership and responsibility, and you're going to let whatever crisis you're in make you better, then this is the next step. This will only work. I mean, really, ultimately, if you want to come out of a crisis season thriving and having grown, and again, better, not bitter, this will only work if you've made the decision that you're going to step into ownership and responsibility and choose to be better. So that's what I want to say right now. Like if you watched the previous video and you've decided that you want to stay a victim, don't even bother watching. Okay. Don't even bother watching. That's fine. That's your choice. You have that choice. But what I'm going to share next is only going to work if you step into ownership. Okay. So let's talk about what to do now. You've decided that you are going to let this make you better and not bitter. You're going to step into ownership and responsibility over what you do have control over, which is your attitude and how you show up in the situation. The next thing is, well, what do we do? Okay, we're in the middle of this crisis. What do we do? How do we handle this? Let's get practical. Okay? We're going to talk practical today. So today, what is practical? And I'm realizing, here's my notes. Number one, okay, and if you've followed me for any length of time, you better learn now. I'm a Christian and I trust in the Lord. A lot of what I teach can apply regardless of whether you are a Christian or not, but do know that I am coming from a biblical Christian worldview. And so I am going to be referencing that a lot. So the number one thing first, practically, is to lean on the Lord, is to invite him into the situation. See, for those of us who are Christians and who are trusting the Lord and leaning on him, we know that he is in control and he is sovereign. He doesn't make bad things happen. That's Satan. Sin, Satan, evil is what makes bad things happen. Okay. And we have free will, and humans have free will. And the consequence of free will is that there is going to be bad things that happen. It just is. So God doesn't make bad things happen, but he knows the outcome and he holds the outcome. And he promised in Romans, I'm forgetting the address, but in Romans, he promises that he works all things together for good for those of us who love God and are called according to his purpose. Okay. That's a promise in the book of Romans. So when you're in a crisis, lean on the Lord, invite him in, ask him to use the situation, ask him to reveal himself to you and become more intimate with you, and lean on him so that you can become more intimate with the Lord, because really that is what's going to get you out of this and is what's going to help you stay out of victim. Because when you're operating in a place of trust and you're operating in a place of faith, you're not able to go into victim mode. So that's the first thing. Then the next thing is choose your focus. You get to choose your attitude. You don't necessarily have control over the circumstances of what's going on outside of you. Sometimes we don't, okay? Part of life. But we always have 100% control over our thoughts and our focus and what we think about, our attitude. And what we think about is what creates our emotions, which is then what creates our actions. which is then what creates our results. So that being the case, you have 100% control over your thoughts, which means you have 100% control over your emotions and your actions. You can control you. So focus on that. What is in your control? What you're thinking about, what you're focusing on, what you're doing. That's all in your control. Even if you're in a situation where that feels no win, like you don't have a choice, you always do have a choice. And that's where faith comes in too, is trusting the Lord to make that He's going to lead you in making the choice that's best for that situation. So if you're in a situation where maybe it's like you're walking through a health journey, or you're walking through something basically where like you don't know a lot of what's going to happen. For my example of what I've just walked through of, I didn't know week to week how long I was going to be pregnant. I didn't know how long. Every time I went in for an ultrasound, there was the possibility that the doctor would find something that was concerning enough that we would need to have my baby come out sooner than planned, right? While she was in the NICU, day to day to day, we never knew what was going to happen next, even sometimes moment to moment. And so instead of focusing on the what ifs and what do we do, what if this, what if that, we focused on what we knew in the moment. In the moment right now, this is the best choice. And that's where, again, faith comes in of like, right now, based on what information we have, what's the next step? That the next step might be washing your dishes and to completely not worrying about it. So that it is focus on what is right in front of you. And that connects to the next one of take one day at a time, or even moment at a time, doing the next right thing and releasing the rest. We, especially in crisis, we can drive ourselves crazy, stressing out about the things that we don't know or the things that we can't control. So when we shift our focus from the things we don't know and the things we can't control to the things that we do know and the things that we can control, all of a sudden, everything gets a lot brighter. Even in really, really hard things. It doesn't mean you don't cry. Okay? It doesn't mean that you're not upset. It's not frustrating. You could have moments, of course. Okay? This isn't to say that we stuff our feelings or invalidate our feelings. Okay? By any stretch of the imagination. But when the feeling comes up, when the sadness comes up, I mean, right now it's March. I'm 3 months into bereavement. 3 months since my baby died. And I still have moments where I'm sad and I cry, or my daughter, my living daughter, my oldest, like just last week was her birthday, and she had several days where just a lot of times throughout the day, she was just sad because she missed her baby sister and wished she could be here. We don't stuff that, even though we don't have control over that. Like, I can't like raise her from the dead, right? Like she's with Jesus. I can't do anything about that. But we feel the feelings. We breathe, we let them come, we let them process, and then we release to the Lord and invite the Lord into comfort. The same thing applies even if it's not a death, but even a job loss in a situation. I remember when my husband lost his job several years ago, about 4 years ago now, my husband lost his job. We had a baby. So I guess 3.5 years. We had our first daughter. She was only a few months old. I was a stay-at-home mom, and my husband lost his job. And it was like, what do we do now? And we had 6 months of him being underemployed. And what I mean by that is like, he didn't even make enough to pay rent. And somehow God provided. Like, looking back, I still have no idea like how all those ends were met. But God provided. Story for another time. But my point in that is, even in that circumstance, similar situation of like, I remember opening the fridge door and looking in and going like, there is no food for the adults. Like, my daughter nurses still and eats baby food, and we do have baby food for her. So that's like, she's fed, but we have absolutely nothing in my fridge right now for adults to eat. And going like, okay, I could freak out about that right now, or I can take a breath and trust the Lord and pray and say like, okay, Lord, like, I trust you that you're going to provide food somehow, or you're going to give us the strength to fast until food's provided. And literally that day, someone had sent us a check in the mail, which was enough to get groceries to feed us for that week. So all that to say is, focus. It doesn't mean focusing on what, like, the here and now and the next right step and releasing the rest. Doesn't mean stuffing, doesn't mean ignoring or suppressing or invalidating. It means feeling the feelings, walking through them, and then moving on, not wallowing. See, where we get in trouble is where we wallow. Wallowing is what then gets into victim, which then gets into depression, which then gets into stuck and becoming bitter. The next thing is, be gentle with yourself. When we're in a crisis, we're in survival mode. Okay? Crisis is survival mode. But that doesn't mean, and sometimes when we're in a crisis, right, we want to go crawl into a hole and just kind of be by ourselves. But we don't always have that luxury, especially if we're a mom. So what we're going to do is we're going to be really gentle with ourselves and our family. Times of crisis are kind of times of, like, hunkering down as a family and as yourself and as your family, to really protect your space, your time, and your energy. Okay? It's okay to say no to things. It's okay to just kind of have some boundaries. Now, this doesn't mean isolate. Isolating is not healthy. But it is okay to cut back on the commitments, to really, like, again, kind of be in survival mode without any guilt. Be gentle. If that means that you're eating off paper plates and using plastic cups and spoons and forks, and, like, so you don't have to do dishes, do it. It's part of that survival mode, how we get through this without going crazy. Get the disposable things so that you don't have to wash dishes. I gotta turn the light on. Hold on a sec. So, there, that's better. You can see me. So get disposable things. If it means quicker meals that are a little bit more convenient, maybe that don't necessarily fully align with what you usually prefer to do if you like to cook from scratch, but you get some faster meals, still do it. It's okay. Be gentle with yourself and no guilt in finding the things that help you cope in a way that's healthy, so that you can prioritize and focus on the more important things of connecting with your family and caring for them and dealing with whatever it is that this crisis is, whether it's a paperwork crisis, whether it's a physical crisis, whether it's an emotional crisis, doing what you need to do to survive. And then that kind of leads into, when you do have pockets of time when there is clarity, when you have some energy and clarity, sometimes it might happen. And if it doesn't happen, again, no beating yourself up. But especially if it's a more long, kind of drawn out situation. In those pockets of clarity, energy, time, do things that will bless future you. So what I mean by this is, let's say you are dealing with some sort of long-term thing, whether it's, let's use job loss as an example. So let's say that you're dealing with the job loss, income loss or job loss. Things are tight. Taking the time to plan and set up systems and routines for normal life, things that need to happen. Maybe adjusting your budget such that you're able to get a bulk item and cook it all at once, like bulk meat on sale, cook it and freeze it. Okay? Or let's go for more like an illness, or caring for, like, whether it's an illness in your family or maybe an elderly relative, like a parent or a grandparent who's needing care, and it's a little bit more of a long, drawn out crisis. Taking a pocket of time to do meal prep, or establishing what are routines for, like, the normal life things that have to happen, right? Like, especially if you're a mom and you have kids, like, your kids still need to eat. Kids still need to either go to school or be homeschooled. Your kids still need to be bathed, right? Like, there's things that are still going to need to happen. If you have a house, a home, right, you're still going to need to have things clean enough that it's a healthy environment, right? Maybe you might lower your cleanliness standards a little bit so that everything's not like sparkling and bleached all the time, but like maybe, you know, you still have to keep some cleanliness, like wash dishes or take out the trash. So use the pockets of time and clarity and energy you have to make plans for that, to like make a plan and a routine and a system. And also to meal prep. Seriously, I cannot even begin to tell you. I'm probably gonna do a whole video on this. Meal prepping is the ultimate lifesaver, even just as a regular mom, because there's always days where you just are tired or you get sick, like just have a cold and you're kind of knocked out for a couple days. How do you handle that? Well, if you meal prep on a consistent basis, that really helps. But even things that are just a little bit more simple, like just pre-making decisions. Because here's the deal. When we're in a crisis, especially, okay, right now I'm really especially talking to moms because I am a mom. And so that's where my experience comes from, right? Of walking through crisis as a mom, particularly. But this can really apply regardless. But moms especially, we're going to have something called decision fatigue, which is where we're having to make so many decisions that after a while we just can't. And even just deciding, do I want Rice Krispies or Cocoa Pops for dinner tonight because I literally can't handle making anything else except cereal, is an overwhelming decision, right? Or do I even want to eat is an overwhelming decision. So that's called decision fatigue. And so when we have moments of clarity and energy, taking the time to pre-make decisions, plan your meals a week or two in advance, or create a really simple basic meal plan. Again, that's a whole nother video I can do on how to do that, of like Mondays we do this and Tuesdays we do this and Thursdays we do this, like make it easy. And the routines for normal life. Okay. So what this will do is it will free up so much time and energy emotionally and physically, so that as the crisis progresses, when you are tired, you don't have to make another decision. You can just pull out the pre-planned meal that you already know what to do. You don't even have to think about it. You just pull it out and do it. So, and same thing with like, if you're a homeschool mom and you're going through crisis, like you don't have to try and figure out, oh gosh, oh right, we need to do school. We haven't done school in 3 days. How do we do this? Like you just pull out your binder and here's school. Let's do it. Okay. The next thing is connect. And there's a couple layers of this, okay? So the first layer of connect is see if you can find people who have gone through something similar, a similar crisis successfully. And by that, I mean someone who was not a victim, someone who chose to become out better, someone who is maybe on the other side of it, not someone who's in the thick of it. Finding someone in the thick of it can be helpful too for like encouragement, maybe. But a lot of times what's even more encouraging is finding someone who's gone through it already, who's a few steps ahead of you, who can kind of be there and say, help you breathe and say, it's okay. You're going to make it through this on the days where you feel like you won't. Having someone who's successfully gone, and that's what I mean by successfully gone through a crisis, of like, they came out of it stronger. They came out of it with their faith increased. They came out of it a better person, having grown, even if it sucked. Reach out to them. I can tell you from personal experience, I don't know that I've ever encountered someone who has gone through, like when I've reached out to say like, hey, I'm going through this hard thing and I know you have too. Can you share, would you be willing to share some encouragement with me right now? The majority of the time, I don't know that I've ever been turned down when I've reached out for that type of encouragement and help. And I can tell you right now, I would always, like personally, I've made that decision. Like I would 100%, if somebody reached out for support and help, answer with support, right? Because when you've gone through a crisis and you've come out on the other side, you have so much more understanding and compassion for the people who are going through it. You know what it's like to be there, so you want to help. Okay, so don't be afraid to reach out to people who could help you and encourage you. Not people who will wallow with you, but people who will hold space. Like, yes, hold space for you to have feelings, for sure. You need that safety and that space to process. But someone who will hold the space, not jump in the mud and cover you with more mud. Okay, they'll just hold the space for you to be in the mud for a bit. And then when you're ready to take a breath, say, I hear you. That is some crappy mud. Here's where we can go now to get out of the mud and help you clean up, right? So connect. Another layer of connection is, who's your inner circle? This doesn't have to be people who've actually gone through the exact same thing, but your inner circle of people who you trust, whether it's family, whether it's some friends, maybe your church, people at church. Do you have an inner circle? And if you don't, find one. But identify the people that are close to you who you can trust, and share. Be honest about where you're at. Be honest about if you need support, and then receive it. Then if they want to give that support to you, if they want to help you, receive it gratefully and say yes to help. Now, this doesn't mean say yes to every single person in the world and stuff. Like, you use discernment in knowing who actually will be a supportive help. But when it's offered, say yes. Like, I'm going to give another example of, like, honestly, in the whole season of my pregnancy, when we did know that my daughter had this defect in her development, I shared with some people, but I didn't, and I think I shared maybe once or twice on social media. I shared a little bit, but I wasn't like blasting all of it all over social media. I took that season of being, while I was pregnant with her, to really lean in and do these things that I'm telling you right now. Lean in and leaning on the Lord, leaning in and connecting with family and friends who were my support system, and developing my faith and my trust in the Lord. And through that, kind of laying that groundwork and preparing physically. We actually physically moved to a new house. But that then kind of paved the way so that then towards the end of that season, after my daughter had passed and I came home and we were transitioning from had a baby, she's sick, now she's gone, and now we're going home, to be open to support and from just being supported, and then continuing to be supported throughout that initial grieving season and that initial aftermath of the crisis too. So when you identify that, though, I think it's not like airing all your dirty laundry on social media necessarily and telling the entire world. But it is also being honest with being really, really, really honest with people you trust, and then telling people, hey, I am going through something hard right now. And accepting the help when it's offered. Some people have a really hard time with that. I used to have a really hard time with that until I realized that it's one of the ways that the Lord blesses me through other people, and sometimes it's a blessing to them to be able to help. And so when I receive that, when I'm in a season of needing support, I'm not only receiving a blessing, but I'm also blessing somebody else by letting them be a blessing. And then I get to turn around and do that for someone when it's my turn to be in a season of being able to give. So all that to say, connect with people, be honest, be real. Don't do the whole like, oh, I'm fine, everything's great, when actually everything's falling apart. Like, identify safe people to share with and share so that you can get support. And then really finally, grace for yourself and those around you. What this exactly looks like, all of these things are going to vary a little bit depending on what type of crisis you're going through. So everything I'm sharing is kind of general advice or suggestions. And I'm always more than happy to talk to people to give find more like specific, how to specifically apply these ideas. But these general principles really work regardless. Grace for yourself and those around you. Really give yourself grace. When you're in a crisis, you're in survival mode. And the people around you might not know how to handle that. They might not know how to help you. So learning how to communicate when you need help and what type of help you need is important. But also giving grace for the people who don't know how to handle it. And maybe it scares them or freaks them out or stresses them out or makes them uncomfortable. Just have a lot of grace. And again, this is where the Lord comes in, is when you lean on Him, He can give you that grace. So when you're operating in grace for yourself, grace for your family, because the times of crisis have a ripple effect. It's not just you being impacted, even if you're the one experiencing the majority of it, even if it's your health issue or your job loss or your like something that's like you're the nucleus of the crisis. Everyone around you, there's a ripple effect of how it impacts them. For example, I'm going to just, I'm going to use this as an example again. For example, it was my baby who died. It was my daughter. I carried her in my womb for 9 months. I held her. I loved her. I was by her bedside every single day, and I held her in my arms as she passed. I think it's pretty safe to say that in this circumstance, like, it's kind of a, like, nucleus of, like, my loss. But it doesn't mean that everyone else doesn't experience loss too. My husband experienced loss. It's his daughter too, right? He didn't carry her and have the same intimate connection to her, but he still loved her and was excited and cared for her and was right there by my side too every single day with her. We were there by her side every single day of her life. But he's experienced it. So there's his ripple. And then my living children, my daughter and my son, who are my older daughter and son who are living, they feel that impact. They lost their sister. They were so excited. They were excited to have a baby sister. They got to go meet her, right? There's that ripple effect. But then there's the ripple effect of extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, great-grandparents, great-aunts, great-uncles, cousins, second cousins or first cousins. I don't remember how that works. But, like, I have a very large family. And so this ripple effect of it's not just me. And so I'm using that as an example, but it can apply to you, whether it's a job loss, whether it's health, whether it's a loved one loss, whether it's housing instability, whatever it is. Part of making sure that we're not stuck in victim is being aware of, I'm not the only person being impacted by this, and so therefore I don't have to, like, try to, like, make everybody else happy by any stretch of the imagination, but I need to hold grace for myself and give myself and be gracious with myself and how I operate, and not maybe lower my standards for myself a little bit as far as, like, what I do, but also giving grace for other people. Other people might be, like, stressed out and worried and have all these feelings, and I need to hold space for them and give them grace as they figure it out. Give them the grace I'd want them to give me. And so that's another really key thing. So those are kind of the top, like, I guess, what was that, 8 tips, things, ways to practically, like, principles to practically implement in the midst of the crisis, and that, like, immediate aftermath of, like, a crisis can be sometimes have, like, a build, right? And then there's, like, the crescendo or the climax, and then it kind of, like, there's, like, the downturn of things getting less chaotic, right, and starting to get back to normal. And so this is kind of the, like, as you're in the, like, climax and kind of immediately after, kind of on that little curve of, like, how do you deal with it. These are the practical things. So hopefully this blessed you. I'd love to hear in the comments if this was helpful. If you know someone who's walking through some sort of a crisis who would be blessed by learning some of these things or be encouraged by some of these things, please share this video and hit subscribe so that you don't miss part 3, which is coming next week, and we will be talking next week about, I have my notes here somewhere. We'll be talking next week about basically how to, what do we do after the crisis, a little bit, I call it the reemergence. So we'll talk about that next week. The reemergence, how do we reestablish normal? How do we get back to a normal life after some intense crisis where we've gone through something really hard? We're going to talk about that next week. So hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it, and I will see you there. Bye.